The wind howls off the Pacific tonight, slamming into me like a drunk ex begging for forgiveness. And I'm standing on Seacrest's 2-mile stretch of beach with my heart pounding so hard, I swear it's about to crack my ribs. My name's Tess Malone, and 3 minutes ago, my husband Jasper turned my life into a cheap bar trick. He called me from his dive bar, voice slurring through the phone, and told me not to come home because he's shacked up with some 25-year-old, and oh, by the way, my house isn't mine anymore. I clutch my little flashlight, my talisman from a decade of lighting up stages bigger than this nowhere Oregon town, and stare out at the waves crashing 50 feet, 15 ME away. The temperature is a chilly 50 degrees Fahrenheit, CA 10 DC, causing you to question every decision you've ever made. 3 days from now, I'm set to unveil my masterpiece, 500 LED bulbs strung across 100 feet of this beach for the annual Seacrest Light Festival, but right now, all I can see is the darkness engulfing me. I am a 38-year-old stage lighting designer who left Portland's indie music scene for a tranquil life in this small coastal town of 3,000 people. My grandma left me a 1,200 square foot wooden house, valued at $300,000 if you believe the real estate vultures who are circling this property. It's got cedar walls, a sagging porch, and a view of the ocean that makes you feel small in a positive way. Or at least it used to. Jasper's been my husband for 10 years. A 6-foot-tall charmer with messy brown hair and a grin that could melt ice caps. He operates the Rusty Anchor, a dilapidated bar located a mile down the road where locals seek solace in inexpensive whiskey and even more affordable lies. I used to think he was my light, the steady glow that kept me grounded when my dreams flickered out. As it turns out, he's merely a broken light bulb, flickering brightly one moment and suddenly going dark the next. Our marriage has been dimming for months, maybe years. He would arrive home at 2 a.m., exuding the scent of bourbon and excuses, while murmuring about spending late nights at the bar. I would stay up late, meticulously sketching light patterns or untangling cables, all the while feigning oblivion as his eyes slid past me, as if I were a ghost in my own home. Tonight, though, he didn't just slide past. He lit the fuse and blew it all up. I was in the shed behind the house, knee-deep in extension cords and cursing a frayed wire when my phone buzzed on the workbench. The screen flashed Jasper's name, causing my stomach to flip between hope and dread. His voice slithered out like a terrible song I could not unhear, and I hit the speaker button with my hands that were too greasy to hold it. Tess, don't bother coming home tonight. Savvy's here with me, and, the house? It's mine now. You're out. I froze, a 10-pound coil of cable slipping from my grip and thudding onto the wood floor. The shed smelled like damp pine and motor oil, but all I could smell was betrayal, sharp and sour. Savvy. Savannah Quinn, the perky blonde who mixes overpriced cocktails at his bar, is all legs and giggles and 25 years young. My house, the one Grandma poured her life into, the one I've paid taxes on with every dime I scraped together, he's claiming it like some pirate hoisting his flag? I snatched the phone, the speaker still blaring, and barked into it. Jasper, what the hell are you talking about? Are you drunk enough to forget the law? That's my inheritance, you bastard. His laugh was low and mean, the type that used to make me blush but now makes me want to punch something. Check the paperwork, Tess. It's done. You're finished. The line went dead, and I stood there, the hum of the ocean filling the silence like it was mocking me. My flashlight rolled off the bench, its beam slicing across the shed's rafters, and I watched it spin, a tiny spotlight on my unraveling world. Paperwork? What paperwork? My mind raced, tripping over itself. Had he forged something? Was he bluffing? My house isn't just walls and a roof. It's the last piece of her, of me. And he's trying to snatch it like it's a tip jar at his bar? I sank to the floor, knees hitting the splintered wood, and let the cold seep through my jeans. The shed's bare bulb flickered overhead, casting jagged shadows that danced like they were laughing at me. I've spent my life making light tell stories, bending it to paint joy or sorrow on stages across the Northwest. I lit up a punk band's farewell show in a Portland warehouse with 2,000 watts of raw emotion, transforming it into an electrifying event. Then I turned a community theater's Christmas play into a glowing miracle for just $50 and a bottle of wine. But this is my story, going dark, and Jasper's holding the switch. I grabbed the flashlight, its metal warm from my grip, and clicked it on and off, like I could reset the night. He thinks I'm done, I muttered, my breath puffing out in little clouds. Thinks he can kick me out of my life with a phone call and a floozy named Savvy. I stood up, legs shaky but stubborn, and shoved the phone in my pocket. The wind outside rattled the shed's tin roof, and I could hear the waves clawing at the shore, relentless. I'm not some dime store bulb he can toss when it burns out, I said to the empty air, my voice cracking but firm. I'm Tess Malone, and I've got 500 lights and 3 days to figure this problem out. I stepped into the night, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the fog rolling in off the water. Jasper wants a fight? Fine. I'll give him one he'll see from a mile away, bright enough to blind him and his little barmaid, too. This adventure isn't over. The journey is just beginning. The fog clung to Seacrest like a severe hangover when I woke up on the shed's lumpy cot, my neck stiff and my jeans still damp from last night's collapse. Jasper's voice echoed in my skull, that slimy mix of smugness and bourbon telling me my house wasn't mine anymore. I rubbed my eyes under my smudged glasses and stumbled outside, the air hitting me with a salty slap at 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Secra, 9 DCC. The beach stretched out 2 miles, 3.22 K in front of me, gray and brooding, waves gnashing at the shore 50 feet, KF 15 M away, like they were as pissed as I was. My flashlight dangled from my belt loop, a cold little reminder of who I used to be, and I kicked a rock into the surf, muttering, "Day one of screwing me over, Jasper. Let's see how you like my encore." I needed coffee, answers, and a plan, in that order, so I climbed into my beat-up Jeep, its engine coughing to life like an old smoker, and rattled 5 miles, 8K, into town, with the windows down, letting the wind whip my hair into a bird's nest. Driftwood Brew sat on Main Street, a weathered shack with peeling paint and a neon open sign that flickered like it was begging for mercy. I pushed through the door, the bell jangling above me, and the smell of burnt espresso enveloped me like a lifeline. I ordered a black coffee, no sugar, and slumped into a booth by the window, the mug scalding my palms as I stared at the 3,000 souls of Seacrest shuffling past. Tourists clogged the sidewalks, snapping pics of the leaf-strewn streets for the Light Festival, oblivious to the fact that my world had just gone dark. I was halfway through my second sip when the door swung open again, and in walked Lila Carter, all 5 feet, 1.52 and 6 inches, cat 15, of her, strutting like she owned the place. Red-dyed hair glowed under the fluorescent lights, camera swinging from her neck, and those sharp green eyes locked onto me like a hawk spotting a wounded rabbit. "Tess Malone," she drawled, sliding into my booth uninvited. "Still kicking, huh? I figured you'd have drowned in your gloom by now." I snorted, leaning back with a glare that could have cracked glass. "Lila, the last time I saw you, you were screwing my high school boyfriend behind the bleachers. What's your next move? Burning my house down?" Yet there was a hint of something softer on her face, perhaps guilt, that she'd likely never confess to, ever admit it. 15 years ago, she'd shattered my teenage heart, and I'd spent prom night crying into a milkshake while she and Danny made out in his dad's Chevy. Now she was a freelance photographer, chasing light like I did, only with a lens instead of a switchboard. "I owe you an explanation," she said, fiddling with her camera strap, "but not today. I'm here for the festival. Heard you're the star this year. I took a long sip, letting the bitterness match my mood. Yeah, well, my husband just kicked me out for a barmaid and says my house is his, so the star might be a little dim. Lila's eyebrows shot up and she leaned in, voice dropping low. Jasper? That sleaze? I would rather not stir things up, but last week I was capturing some nighttime shots behind the rusty anchor. I spotted him in his pickup, his arms wrapped around a blonde who was half his age. Thought it was just him being a dog, but now... My stomach twisted, coffee turning sour on my tongue. Savannah Quinn, I said, the name tasting like ash. She's 25 and she works at his bar. You're telling me you saw them? Lila nodded, pulling her phone from her jacket. She swiped to a blurry photo. Jasper's truck, parked under a street lamp, him and Savvy tangled up in the front seat, her hair spilling over his shoulder. She said, I hadn't given it much thought until now. But if he's pulling this house stunt, maybe it's bigger than a fling. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. Bigger how? I asked, but she just shrugged, leaving me with a puzzle piece I didn't know how to place. I didn't thank her. I didn't have to. I shoved out of the booth, coffee sloshing over the rim, and marched out into the crisp morning, the 0.5-mile drive to the rusty anchor burning through my veins. The bar squatted on the edge of town, a squat brick box with a faded anchor sign swinging in the breeze. I slammed the Jeep door and stormed inside, the stale smell of beer and regret overwhelming me. Jasper was behind the counter, wiping down glasses with that lazy grin of his, all 6 feet 1.83 m of him looking too damn comfortable. Savvy stood 10 feet, case 3 m away, polishing the bar top, her blonde ponytail bobbing as she glanced up, eyes widening when she saw me. Well, well, Jasper said, not even looking up. Didn't expect you here, Tess. Thought I made myself clear last night. I planted my hands on the counter, leaning in so close I could smell the whiskey on his breath. Savvy's your new roommate, huh? What's next? Are you planning to paint my house pink and label it as a love nest? Jasper, please explain the paperwork, or I may have to escalate the situation in a way that won't be ideal for you. He finally met my gaze, brown eyes glinting with something cold, and chuckled like I was a kid throwing a tantrum. You don't need to know the details, babe. It's done. Go crash with your artsy friends and leave me be. Savvy shifted, her hands pausing mid-wipe, and I caught the flicker of fear in her face, like she wasn't sure what she'd signed up for. I stepped back, my voice dropping low. You think this is a game? I'll show you light, Jasper. Real light, the kind that burns. While his laughter chased me into the wind, Savvy's silence resonated with me more deeply. She wasn't smug. She was scared. And that meant something. Back home, or where it used to be, I needed more than hunches. I crossed the 200-foot stretch of patchy grass to Milo Delgado's place, a sagging cabin that looked like it'd collapse under a stiff breeze. He answered my knock with a grunt, all 6 feet, 1.83 m and 2 inches cat 5 cm, of him looming in the doorway, cigarette dangling from his lips, the smell of tobacco curling out like a ghost. What? He rasped, voice like gravel. I spilled it all, Jasper's call, the house, Savvy, and Lila's photo. Milo didn't blink, just jerked his head for me to follow. Inside, his living room was a mess of car parts and old TVs, but he fired up a grainy security monitor hooked to a camera pointed at my driveway. Caught this a month ago, he said, hitting play. The screen flickered, showing Jasper's truck parked late at night, him kissing Savvy in the cab, then stepping out to meet somebody in a cheap suit. They shook hands over a stack of papers, Jasper grinning like he'd won the lottery. Heard him at the garage, Milo added, exhaling smoke. Said he's selling your place. Bragged about faking your signature. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the arm of his ratty couch. That's fraud, I whispered, the word weighing heavily on my tongue. He's stealing everything. Milo shrugged, like it wasn't his fight, but his eyes said he'd seen worse. I stumbled back to my shed, the 1,200-square-foot house I couldn't even enter looming across the yard like a taunt. I sank onto the cot, cradling a fresh mug of black coffee, its heat searing my palms. Jasper wasn't just cheating. He was erasing me piece by piece with a pen and a lie. However, he hadn't completely erased me yet. I set the mug down, grabbed my sketchbook, and started drawing. 500 lights, 100 feet, 30 m, of wire, a story in beams and shadows. "The festival's mine," I said aloud, voice steadying. "I'll make him the star of a show he can't walk away from." I dialed Lila. Her number was still etched in my mind from years of hatred. "You want redemption?" I snapped when she picked up. "Get me more from that bar. Photos, receipts, anything." She paused, then said, "On it." I hung up, my flashlight clicking on in the dark. "Game on, Jasper. Let's see who burns brighter." 3 days following Jasper's treachery, I found myself standing on Seacrest Beach beneath a pitch-black sky that engulfed the stars, the chill of 45 degrees causing my breath to fog up. The Light Festival was here, and the 2-mile stretch of sand buzzed with 2,000 people, their murmurs rising over the crash of waves 50 feet, 15 away. My hands trembled as I adjusted the cables snaking through the dunes, 500 LED bulbs glowing like fireflies along 100 feet, 30 m of wire, showcasing my life's work for the world to see. I'd barely slept since Milo's video turned my stomach inside out, and Jasper's smug face signing away my house burned into my brain. Tonight wasn't just art. It was war. My glasses fogged with every exhale, and I wiped them on my torn jeans, muttering, "Showtime, Tess? Don't screw this up." The crowd pressed in, tourists and locals alike, their flashlights bobbing like tiny echoes of the one clipped to my belt. I caught a glimpse of Jasper near the edge, 30 feet, 600 foot, slouched next to Savvy, her blonde hair catching the glow of a vendor's lantern. He thought he'd won. I'd make sure he choked on that grin. Lila slipped through the throng just as I finished testing the control board, her red hair aflare in the dark. She shoved a USB drive into my hand, voice low and urgent. "I picked these up at the bar last night." Jasper and Savvy were in his office with papers neatly arranged on the desk. "Are you sure about this?" I gripped the drive, its edges biting into my palm, and nodded. "He lit the match, Lila. I'm just fanning the flames." She hesitated, then smirked, the old sharpness back in her eyes. "Then burn it down, Malone." She disappeared back into the crowd, leaving me with the generator's hum and the weight of my decision. I plugged the USB into my laptop and synced it to the projector I'd rigged behind the main screen, a 20-foot canvas of light looming over the beach. My fingers hovered over the controls, heart hammering like a drum solo gone wrong. "For Grandma's house," I whispered. "And for myself." I flipped the switch. The light surged to life, a wave of color slicing through the night. Reds and blues danced across the sky, weaving a story only I could tell. First, a silhouette of a man, tall and broad, flickered into being, his shadow stretching over the dunes. The crowd hushed, heads tilting up. Then a woman appeared, smaller, her outline soft but steady, standing beside him. I twisted a dial, and the man turned, his light dimming as a third figure slunk in, young and sharp, wrapping around him like a vine. Gasps rippled through the audience as the woman's glow flared brighter, alone now, while the man's faded into black, swallowed by the new shadow. It was abstract, sure, but anyone with eyes could see it. Jasper ditching me for Savvy, leaving me to shine or shatter. I grabbed the mic wired to my board, my voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the wind. "This isn't just a show, folks. It's the truth. Jasper Malone, my husband, kicked me out of my house 3 days ago. He's been cheating with Savannah Quinn, and he forged papers to steal what's mine." The projector kicked on, Milo's grainy video splashing across the screen, Jasper's truck, him kissing Savvy, then shaking hands with that suit over a stack of documents, the timestamp glaring. The date was October 2, 2025, which was a full month ago. The crowd erupted, their whispers turning into shouts. I zoomed in on Jasper's face, his smirk frozen in pixels, and swung the mic toward him. "Anything to say, babe?" His head snapped up, eyes wild, and I saw Savvy stumble back, her hands flying to her mouth. "He told me he'd leave you," she cried, voice cracking over the noise. "He said it was over." The crowd parted around them, heads swiveling like they were watching a car wreck. Jasper's face twisted, red and furious, and he charged through the sand, shoving people aside. "Turn it off, Teth," he roared, his boots pounding 30 feet. C8.9 into 10, then 5. He lunged for the control board, meaty hands outstretched, and I ducked, my laptop clattering to the ground. He grabbed a fistful of cables, yanking hard, and half the lights winked out, plunging the beach into patchy shadow. The crowd screamed, some cheering, some cursing, but I scrambled up, adrenaline scorching my veins. "You don't get to shut me down," I yelled, shoving him back with all 130 pounds, 59 kg of me. He staggered, sand spraying, then swung at the board again, his fist smashing a switch. Sparks flew, and I smelled burning plastic, but I didn't flinch. "You're done, Jasper. Everyone sees you now." He froze, chest heaving, and that's when Milo stepped out of nowhere, all 6 feet, 1.83 m and 2 inches, K-pop 5 cm, of him looming like a grizzly. He grabbed Jasper's arm, twisting it behind his back with a grunt. "Enough, Malone," he rasped, cigarette still smoldering between his lips. "Let her finish," Jasper thrashed, cursing loud enough to wake the dead. But Milo held firm, his grip iron. I snatched the mic from the stand, my glasses crooked and hair a mess, and faced the crowd. This is my house and my life. He thought he could snuff me out like a cheap candle. But I'm not a flicker. I'm the whole damn sky, and he's just the darkness I don't need. I cranked the backup generator, and the remaining lights blazed back, brighter than before, painting the beach in gold and crimson. The crowd roared, clapping and hollering, some snapping pics with their phones. Savvy broke down, sobs shaking her frame as she pushed through the mob and vanished toward the parking lot, her ponytail whipping behind her. Jasper glared at me, pinned by Milo, his face a mask of rage and ruin. "You'll pay for this, Teth," he spat, but his voice was weak, drowned by the cheers. I didn't have an opportunity to savor it. Lila's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and close. "Cops are here." I turned, spotting 2 officers weaving through the crowd, flashlights slicing the dark. She'd called them, just like we'd planned when I asked her for more dirt. They reached Jasper, and Milo stepped back, dusting his hands like he'd just fixed a tire. "Jasper Malone?" one cop said, pulling cuffs from his belt. "We've got questions about some forged documents. You're coming with us." Jasper's eyes darted, wild and trapped, but he didn't fight as they hauled him off, his boots dragging ruts in the sand. The crowd parted, some jeering, some silent, and I watched him go, my chest tight, but lighter than it'd been in years. The lights pulsed above me, my story still shining, and I sank to my knees beside the wrecked control board, sand gritty under my palms. The projector looped Milo's video, a silent encore, and I let out a shaky laugh. "Burned you, Jasper," I whispered, my flashlight digging into my hip. The festival wasn't over, but my flight was. I'd lit up the truth, and it was blinding. The cops' radios crackled as they disappeared into the night, Jasper's shadow shrinking with them. I looked up at the sky, my lights cutting through the fog, and felt the first real breath I'd taken in days. He wanted me to remain in darkness. I gave him fire instead. The festival lights dimmed as the crowd thinned out, their voices fading into the night like echoes off the cliffs, leaving me alone on Seacrest's beach with the taste of salt and victory on my lips. I sat cross-legged in the sand 50 feet from the waves, my wrecked control board a silent casualty beside me. At 47 degrees Fahrenheit, 8 DGC, the air hung heavy, with fog enveloping the 2-mile stretch as if shrouding the town in a veil. Jasper, his betrayal exposed for all 2,000 festival-goers to see, was hauled off in cuffs under the glare of my lights. My flashlight rested in my lap, its beam flickering as I clicked it on and off, a nervous tick I couldn't shake. The adrenaline still buzzed in my veins, but it was softening now, sinking into something quieter, something I hadn't felt in years. Control. I tilted my head back, letting the damp wind sting my face, and whispered to the dark, "You didn't snuff me out, Jasper. Not even close." A week later, I found myself in the Seacrest courthouse, a squat brick building 3 miles, 75K inland, where the air smelled of dust and old coffee. The hearing was quick, almost anticlimactic after the fireworks of the festival. I sat on a hard wooden bench, my glasses slipping down my nose, while the judge flipped through a stack of papers thicker than my sketchbook. Milo's video played on a grainy monitor, Jasper's smug handshake with that suit looping in silence, followed by Lila's photos of the bar office, time-stamped and damning. My hands clenched in my lap as the lawyer I'd hired, a wiry guy named Pete with a tie too loud for a courtroom, laid it out. Jasper had forged my signature on a deed transfer, tried to sell my $300,000 house to some shady developer for a quick $400,000. This was blatant fraud. Jasper slouched across the room, his 6-foot frame hunched in an orange jumpsuit, eyes hollow like the fight had drained out of him. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, he just stared at the floor, lips tight. "Mr. Malone," the judge said, voice flat, "you're looking at 6 months for forgery plus restitution. The house stays with Ms. Malone. Case closed." Upon the crack of the gavel, I exhaled a breath that I was unaware I had been suppressing. He looked up then, just for a second, and our eyes met across the 20-foot gap. I didn't flinch. "You were my light once," I said under my breath, too low for him to hear, "but you burned out long before I did." Pete clapped me on the shoulder as we walked out, the late October sun slanting through the pines at 55 degrees Fahrenheit, Tuppa, 13 DC. "You're free and clear, Tess," he said, grinning. "He's got nothing left to take." I nodded, but it wasn't just the house I'd won back. It was me. Jasper's bar got seized the next day, back taxes he'd dodged for years, catching up like a violent debt collector. Last I heard, he was crashing on a buddy's couch, his charm as useless as a busted bulb. The fallout rippled through the others, too. Savvy didn't stick around to see it play out. 2 days after the festival, I found a crumpled note slipped under the shed door, her handwriting shaky on a bar napkin. "Tess, I'm sorry. He lied to me, too. I'm gone." I pictured her packing her bags, that blonde ponytail swinging as she hitched a ride out of Seacrest, maybe to Portland or somewhere bigger where she could start over. I didn't hate her. She'd been a pawn, same as me, just younger and dumber. Lila, though, wasn't going anywhere. She showed up at my house a few days later, the 1,200-square-foot sanctuary I'd reclaimed, her camera slung over her shoulder like always. "So," she said, leaning against the porch rail, "do you forgive me yet for Danny and the bleachers?" I sipped my black coffee, the mug warm against my palms, and smirked. "Not quite, but you pulled through when it counted, so I'll call it even." She grinned, sharp and bright. "Good enough. Shall we team up? I can provide the lens, and you can provide the lights. Seattle's got gigs waiting." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. The idea flickered in my head, a tiny spark I wasn't ready to fan yet. Milo remained consistent, appearing as a shadow in his cabin from a distance of 200 feet, 61 m. After the hearing, I knocked once just to say thanks. He opened the door with that same cigarette dangling, smoke curling out into the crisp air. "He heard you won," he grunted, eyes glinting under his ball cap. "Told you he was a punk." I handed him a six-pack of beer, my version of gratitude, and he took it with a nod. "You didn't have to help," I said. He shrugged, already turning back inside. "Didn't have to watch him screw you over either." The door clicked shut, but the next morning I found a note taped to my mailbox in his scratchy scrawl, "Good job, Malone." I tucked it in my pocket, a rare smile tugging at my lips. Milo didn't say much, but he'd lit a match when I needed it most. Back in the house, I started piecing my life together, 1 watt at a time. The cedar walls smelled like home again, not Jasper's stale cologne, and I hauled his junk to the curb. A ratty recliner, a box of bar coasters, a guitar he never played. I sold half of it for $200 and bought a new set of LED strips, the kind I'd dreamed of using on a real stage. The festival had trashed my setup, but the town council called the next day, offering $5,000 to rebuild for next year. "You put us on the map?" the mayor said, voice crackling through the phone. "That show was insane." I laughed, the sound raw but real. "Insane's my specialty." I hung up and stood in the living room, the ocean glinting through the window a mile out. My flashlight sat on the coffee table, a dented little beacon, and I picked it up, clicking it on. The beam cut through the dusk, steady and sure. I had stopped relying on exhaust fumes. Jasper attempted to drown me, yet I ignited with a brightness he could never have imagined. The house was mine, the lights were mine, and for the first time in years, I was mine too. I stepped onto the porch, the wind tugging at my hair, and looked out at the horizon. "Round one to me," I said to the empty air, my voice carrying over the dunes. The fight wasn't over, not really, but I'd won the war that mattered. Jasper was rapidly diminishing, and I was prepared to shine according to my conditions. A month after I turned Jasper's lies into a bonfire on Seacrest's beach, I stood on the same sandy stretch at dusk, the sun bleeding orange across the 2-mile horizon. The air bit at 48 degrees Fahrenheit, DC, sharp and clean, tugging at my hair as I watched waves crash 50 feet, 15 m, away, their rhythm steady like a heartbeat I'd finally learned to trust. My flashlight dangled from my belt, its familiar weight a quiet anchor, and I kicked off my boots, letting the cold sand sift between my toes. The festival was a memory now, its 500 lights packed away, but the glow lingered in me, a fire Jasper couldn't touch. I'd won back my 1,200-square-foot house, my pride, my spark, and as the sky darkened, I felt the weight of his shadow lift for good. I retrieved a single LED bulb from my pocket, which I had salvaged from the wreckage of that night, and turned it on using a homemade battery. Its faint light danced in my palm, a tiny star against the fading day. "For the old me," I murmured, then tossed it into the surf, watching the waves swallow it whole. And for what's next? The house felt alive again, cedar walls humming with my footsteps instead of his silence. I'd turned the living room into a workshop, cables and bulbs spilling across the floor, sketches pinned to every surface. Representing an opportunity for larger projects, the town sat in my bank account, promising bigger stages, but I wasn't in a rush. Seacrest held me still, its pines and salt air rooting me deeper than I'd expected. Lila called yesterday, her voice crackling through the line from Portland. "Seattle's waiting, Tess. There are lights and lenses, and you and I are present. What do you say?" I'd leaned against the porch rail, coffee steaming in my mug, and grinned into the receiver. "Not yet, Carter. I'm still wiring my show here." She laughed, sharp and bright, and didn't push. "Your call, Malone. Just don't dim out on me." I hung up, the idea simmering like a low flame. Maybe I'd go, maybe I'd stay, but for once the choice was mine. I sank into the sand now, the ocean stretching a mile beyond my sight, and clicked my flashlight on its beam slicing through the twilight. Jasper was a ghost, a flicker I'd outshone, and the quiet left behind wasn't empty. It was full of me. "I'm not half bad," I said aloud, smirking at the waves. "Maybe even pretty damn good." I steadied the light in my hand and let it shine, signaling to myself that the darkness was over. I'd built a story from ashes, and the next one would be brighter still.